I stood shivering in the freezing Seattle rain while my husband hurled my expensive luggage down our front steps. My designer clothes spilled onto the muddy lawn, ruined in an instant. But the real blow came when he threw a plastic stick at my chest. It was my positive pregnancy test. He pointed a finger in my face and screamed that he had a vasectomy 3 years ago, declaring he would never raise another man's bastard. He locked me out, convinced he was the victim, clearing the house for a reason I had yet to discover. He had absolutely no idea that his cruel, calculated lie was about to trigger a chain of events that would strip him of his company, his dignity, and his entire future, all thanks to a $50 million secret from my past. My name is Sydney, and I am 34 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your trust entirely broken by the person you loved most, only to rise from the ashes stronger than before. Growing up in the foster system taught me how to survive, but absolutely nothing prepared me for the devastating betrayal I experienced on that stormy Tuesday night. The relentless Pacific Northwest rain battered my face as I stared up at the custom oak door of our Bellevue home. It was the house I had spent my hard-earned money decorating using my income as a public relations consultant to turn a sterile property into a warm, inviting sanctuary. Now I was standing on the flooded driveway, watching the man I had loved for 5 years destroy everything we had built together. Trent. My 36-year-old husband stood on the covered porch. The warm glow of the exterior lights illuminated his handsome face, which was currently twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He grabbed my heavy leather suitcase by the handle and swung it wildly. The zipper burst open upon impact with the concrete walkway. Silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, and carefully tailored slacks scattered across the wet grass, instantly soaking up the mud and freezing water. I tried to step forward, my hands raised in a desperate pleading gesture. "Trent, please stop. What are you doing? Let us go inside and talk about this. The neighbors are going to hear us." He let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut right through the sound of the pouring rain. "Let them hear us, Sydney. Let the whole neighborhood know exactly what kind of woman you really are." He reached into the pocket of his expensive tailored jacket and pulled out a small white plastic object. He threw it at me with such aggressive force that it bounced off my waterproof coat and landed in a dark puddle at my feet. I looked down. It was the positive pregnancy test I had left on the bathroom counter just an hour earlier, wrapped in a small gift box with a ribbon. I had planned to surprise him when he got home from work. I had planned to celebrate the family we were finally starting. Instead, he was looking at me with pure, unfiltered disgust. "Do not try to pin this bastard on me," he shouted, his voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. I stared at him, completely shell-shocked. My mind struggled to process the sheer hostility of his words. "Trent, what are you saying? This is our baby. We talked about this." He took a menacing step toward the edge of the porch, his fists clenched at his sides. "Stop lying to my face, Sydney. I had a vasectomy 3 years ago. I never reversed it. There is absolutely no biological way that the child in your stomach belongs to me. So tell me, which one of your wealthy public relations clients have you been sleeping with?" The air was violently knocked out of my lungs. The accusation was so absurd, so entirely disconnected from reality, that for a brief second I thought he was experiencing some kind of mental break. I wiped the freezing rain from my eyes, desperately trying to reason with the man towering above me. "Trent, you know exactly how I got pregnant. We did a cycle of in vitro fertilization 2 years ago. We froze 3 perfectly healthy embryos. I told you last month that I was scheduling the transfer. I asked you to come to the clinic with me. I remembered that day perfectly. I had stood in our kitchen holding the clinic brochures, practically begging him to join me for the appointment. He had barely looked up from his laptop, claiming he had an urgent corporate audit to prepare for, and told me to just handle the medical appointments myself. He scoffed, shaking his head with exaggerated disbelief. "You really think I am that stupid I called the clinic, Sydney? They told me you never showed up for any transfer. You are making up this elaborate lie to cover up your disgusting affair, and I am not going to stand here and let you make a fool out of me." My heart hammered violently against my ribs. None of what he was saying made any sense. I had been at the clinic. I had the medical records, the receipts, the discharge papers. I reached into my coat pocket to grab my phone, intending to pull up the secure patient portal to prove it to him right then and there. Look at my medical portal, Trent. The transfer was completed on the 14th. Dr. Aris performed it himself. Just look at the screen. I walked up the bottom step, holding out my glowing phone, but before I could even show him the display, he violently swatted my hand away. The phone flew out of my grasp and clattered brutally down the concrete stairs, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of useless glass. "I do not need to look at your fake evidence," he snarled, his eyes narrowing with a terrifying cold calculation. "I know the truth. You are a cheater, a liar, and a fraud. I am filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning." He turned around, picked up the final cardboard box of my belongings from the entryway, and dumped it unceremoniously onto the porch. Books, high-end cosmetics, and my favorite coffee mug shattered against the hard surface, sending ceramic shards flying into the rain. "This is my house," Trent yelled, pointing a rigid finger directly at my face. "My name is on the deed, and you have exactly 0 rights to be here. Leave your keys on the mat. If you try to come back inside, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." I stood there paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming violence of his rejection. This was the man who had promised to protect me. The man I had financially supported through his grueling corporate promotions, the man whose empty house I had turned into a beautiful home. Now he was looking at me like I was an enemy he needed to eradicate. My hands trembled uncontrollably, not just from the biting cold of the Seattle storm, but from the massive, cruel mistake he was making. I knew the truth. I knew the baby growing inside me was absolutely his. I knew I had never been unfaithful for a single second of our entire marriage. As a public relations consultant, I made a living analyzing human behavior, detecting lies, and managing corporate crises. I knew exactly what a fabricated narrative looked like. And looking into Trent's eyes, a sickening realization washed over me. He was not a heartbroken husband discovering a betrayal. He was a man executing a meticulously planned exit strategy. The rage was entirely performative. The vasectomy claim was a calculated weapon. He stepped back inside the warm, dry foyer and grabbed the heavy brass handle of the front door. "Have a nice life, Sydney. Try to find a fool who actually wants to raise another man's mistake." The heavy oak door slammed shut with a sickening thud. The deadbolt clicked into place, echoing loudly in the damp night air. I was left entirely alone in the dark, soaking wet, staring at the ruins of my marriage scattered across the muddy lawn. I had no idea that Trent was actively clearing me out of the house for a very specific, sinister reason. But as I stood there in the pouring rain, wrapping my arms around my stomach to protect the tiny life inside me, a quiet, terrifying resolve began to take root in my chest. He had just made the biggest miscalculation of his life. The heavy deadbolt clicked, echoing loudly, just moments after Trent had locked me out. The oak door swung open again, casting a long, mocking shadow across the flooded walkway. I briefly thought Trent had come to his senses. I stepped forward, rain dripping from my eyelashes, ready to explain the clinic protocols, the embryo transfer, the scientific facts he was so deliberately ignoring. But Trent was not alone. Stepping onto the covered porch, holding a steaming mug of tea as if she were watching a theatrical performance, was his 62-year-old mother, Patricia. Right behind her hovered Courtney, his 32-year-old sister, wearing a smug, satisfied grin that mirrored her brother perfectly. They had been inside the entire time. They had listened to him throw my belongings into the mud and accuse me of infidelity, and they had done absolutely nothing to stop it. "Patricia," I gasped, my voice hoarse from the freezing wind. "Tell him he is making a mistake. You know we froze embryos 2 years ago. You were at the hospital with us when they retrieved them. You know this baby is his." Patricia took a slow, deliberate sip from her mug. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair remained untouched by the storm raging just feet away from her. She looked down at me, her gaze sweeping over my ruined clothes and my shattered phone on the concrete stairs. "Do not drag me into your disgusting lies, Sydney," Patricia said, her voice dripping with venom. "Trent told us you canceled the transfer. He told us you have been acting erratically, staying out late, working with those high-profile male clients of yours. We all know what happens in the public relations industry. You are a career-obsessed woman who finally realized her biological clock was ticking and panicked. I stared at her, the betrayal compounding with every syllable she uttered. They were actively rewriting history. Courtney stepped forward, leaning against the doorframe, crossing her arms over her expensive cashmere sweater. "Just give it up, Sydney," Courtney sneered. "My brother is too smart to fall for your trap. He had the vasectomy to ensure you could not trap him with a pregnancy when your PR business inevitably went under. You thought you could sleep around, get pregnant, and use our family wealth to secure your future. It is pathetic." I shook my head, my mind spinning from the sheer audacity of their gaslighting. What family wealth? I demanded, the shock finally giving way to a burning white-hot anger. I paid for the renovation of this entire house. I funded Trent's lifestyle while he was a junior associate. I built my agency from the ground up while you, Courtney, have lived off your husband's paycheck for a decade. Patricia slammed her mug down on the patio table. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way?" Patricia hissed, her face contorting with rage. "I told Trent from the very beginning that marrying a nobody with no family background was a massive mistake. You grew up in the foster system. You have no pedigree, no class, and no concept of loyalty. You are just a stray dog he brought home, and now you are biting the hand that fed you. We allowed you into our family, and you repaid us by cheating on my son and trying to pass off a bastard child as a rightful heir." Trent stepped in front of his mother and sister, puffing out his chest, completely emboldened by his toxic audience. "Let us make one thing perfectly clear, Sydney. I am filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning, and I am keeping the house. You foolishly agreed to leave your name off the deed to secure a better mortgage rate because of your student loans. You have no legal standing here. You have no family to run to. You have absolutely nothing. Take your wet clothes and start walking. If you are not off my property in 60 seconds, I am calling the police." The cruelty was so synchronized, so perfectly orchestrated, that the terrifying truth finally clicked into place. This was not a spontaneous argument. This was an ambush. They had planned this exact moment. They had waited for a stormy night to throw me out, ensuring I would be at my most vulnerable. They wanted to break me mentally and financially, stripping me of the assets I had poured into this marriage, leaving me stranded on the street with an unborn child. They truly believed I was a weak, isolated orphan who would simply crumble under their combined weight. They thought I would walk away quietly in the rain, ashamed and defeated. I stood my ground. The freezing rain soaked through my coat, chilling me to the bone, but the fire igniting in my chest kept me perfectly still. I looked at Trent, then at Patricia, and finally at Courtney, memorizing the smug satisfaction plastered across their faces. I was about to tell them that I would drag them through every courtroom in the state, that I would subpoena every medical record and expose their malicious fraud to the world. But before I could utter a single syllable, a blinding beam of light sliced through the heavy downpour, casting harsh, sweeping shadows across the flooded lawn. The low, unmistakable purr of a high-performance engine cut through the sound of the crashing rain. We all turned our heads toward the street. A sleek, midnight black luxury sedan was gliding smoothly up our long driveway, its tires slicing through the deep puddles with arrogant ease. It was a vehicle that cost more than Trent's entire annual salary, a car that commanded immediate attention and respect. The vehicle rolled to a smooth stop right behind my ruined luggage. The headlights illuminated the rain-soaked driveway, freezing Trent, Patricia, and Courtney in their tracks. The smug grins melted off their faces, replaced instantly by utter confusion. The heavy engine idled quietly, vibrating with raw power as the passenger side door slowly began to open. The heavy engine idled quietly, vibrating with raw power as the passenger side door slowly began to open. But before the occupant could step out into the violent storm, the front door of the house was pushed open even wider. Jamal rushed onto the porch. At 34 years old, Jamal was a striking African-American man who usually carried himself with quiet, steady dignity. Tonight, however, his face was pale with absolute horror. He had clearly been upstairs, completely unaware of the full extent of the ambush, until the shouting echoed through the walls of the house. He held my heavy wool winter coat tightly in his hands. His eyes darted frantically from the scattered debris of my life to my freezing, soaked figure standing in the freezing mud. "Sydney, you are freezing," Jamal said. His voice was thick with empathy and deep disbelief. He took a decisive step down the concrete stairs, extending the warm coat toward me. "Please take this coat. You absolutely cannot be out here in this weather." Before his foot could even hit the second step, Courtney lunged forward with terrifying speed. She dug her manicured nails into Jamal's forearm and violently yanked him backward. "What do you think you are doing?" she shrieked, her face twisted with ugly territorial rage. "Do not give that cheating fraud a single thing from this house. She is trespassing on our property." Jamal stumbled back, his jaw tightening as he looked at his wife. "Courtney, look at her," he pleaded, dropping his voice to a desperate, urgent whisper. "She is pregnant. She is freezing in the rain. This is completely insane. You cannot just throw her out into a severe storm like this." Trent whipped around, pointing his finger directly at Jamal's chest. "You better remember exactly who signs your paychecks," Jamal Trent threatened. His voice dropped to a lethal, calculating volume. "You are the chief accountant at my company. You live in a house I helped finance for my sister. If you hand that woman that coat, you can clear out your desk on Monday morning and join her on the street. Do not test me tonight." I watched the fight instantly drain from Jamal's eyes. The threat was a direct, devastating hit to his livelihood and his marriage. He was trapped in their toxic web, entirely dependent on Trent's corporate payroll to survive and provide for his own family. He looked down at the wool coat in his hands, his knuckles turning white from his grip, and then he slowly lowered his head in crushing shame. He stepped back into the shadows of the porch, physically unable to meet my gaze. I did not blame him at all. I knew exactly how ruthlessly Trent and Patricia punished anyone who dared to defy their twisted family loyalty. With Jamal effectively silenced, the family turned their eager attention back to the sleek Mercedes idling in our driveway. A driver in a sharp black suit rounded the hood and opened an oversized umbrella, holding it carefully over the passenger side. A pair of red stiletto heels stepped onto the wet asphalt, followed by the rest of Bianca. She was 28 years old and dripping in conspicuous aggressive wealth. She wore a pristine white designer trench coat that looked utterly ridiculous in the Seattle downpour. She clutched a limited edition handbag against her side, shaking out her flawless salon-styled hair. She looked up at the house, completely ignoring my ruined belongings scattered across the lawn. This was the woman Trent had been hiding. This was the self-proclaimed heiress Patricia and Courtney had so eagerly traded me for. Trent transformed instantly. The terrifying red-faced monster who had just hurled my luggage into the mud completely vanished. In his place stood a sickeningly eager, fawning suitor. He bounded down the wet concrete steps, completely ignoring my presence, as he brushed past my shivering form. "Bianca, darling," Trent cooed, reaching her side and wrapping his arms tightly around her waist. He pulled her close and kissed her passionately right there in the rain. He pressed his lips to hers in a deliberate, highly choreographed display of affection. It was a kiss meant entirely for my benefit, a final brutal stab to ensure I understood exactly how easily I had been replaced by someone younger and supposedly wealthier. When they pulled apart, Bianca let out a high, artificial laugh. She finally allowed her eyes to land on me. She scanned my soaking wet clothes, my ruined hair, and the shattered pieces of my favorite coffee mug resting in the mud. She did not look surprised or apologetic in the slightest. She looked at me the way someone might look at a piece of trash that had blown onto her pristine driveway. "Oh my goodness, Trent," Bianca purred, pressing herself dramatically against his side. "Is this the crazy ex-wife you told me about? The one who refuses to leave gracefully?" Trent kissed her temple, shooting me a glare of absolute contempt. "Do not worry about her baby. She was just leaving. Come inside. It is freezing out here and you need to protect our little miracle. Our little miracle." The words hit my chest like a physical blow. The hypocrisy was so staggering I could barely draw breath. Trent was parading his pregnant mistress into the house, proudly claiming her unborn child, while simultaneously rejecting his own biological baby growing inside me. Patricia and Courtney parted like the Red Sea. Their faces beamed with fake, overjoyed smiles as Trent escorted Bianca up the stairs. "Oh, Bianca, we are so thrilled you are finally here!" Patricia gushed loudly, reaching out to take the younger woman's expensive coat. "Let us get you warmed up by the gorgeous fireplace inside." The sheer cruelty of watching another woman walk into the home I had funded and furnished with my own money was paralyzing. Trent paused at the threshold, keeping one arm firmly around Bianca's waist. He looked back at me over his shoulder, his eyes gleaming with malicious, undeniable victory. "Goodbye, Sydney. I suggest you start walking." The heavy oak door slammed shut for the final time. The deadbolt engaged with a loud metallic click. The exterior porch light snapped off, plunging the yard into immediate darkness. I was left standing entirely alone in the freezing rain, surrounded by the waterlogged ruins of my past, shivering uncontrollably as the storm raged on. I forced my frozen limbs to move, dropping to my knees in the freezing mud to salvage what little I could. My fingers were completely numb as I stuffed a few soaking wet sweaters and my ruined laptop into the only suitcase that still had a functioning zipper. I dragged the heavy waterlogged bag down the flooded street to where I had parked my 10-year-old sedan. Trent had insisted I keep my old car to save money, claiming his image as an executive required the luxury vehicles we leased strictly under his name. Now that beat-up sedan was the only shelter I had left. I threw the sodden bag into the trunk, climbed into the driver's seat, and locked the doors with shaking hands. The heater roared to life, blasting lukewarm air against my soaking wet clothes. I drove aimlessly away from the wealthy Bellevue neighborhood, watching the sprawling mansions fade into the dark, relentless storm. I eventually pulled into the flickering neon glow of a cheap, rundown motel parking lot on the outskirts of the city. I checked my bank application on my cracked phone screen. Trent had already drained our joint checking account, leaving a balance of 0. I had exactly $42 in my personal account to my name. I killed the engine and curled into a tight ball in the back seat, pulling a damp wool coat over my shivering shoulders. The rain hammered aggressively against the thin metal roof of the car. I placed a trembling hand flat against my stomach, feeling the slight, barely noticeable curve beneath my ruined clothes. The despair threatening to pull me under suddenly shifted into a fierce, blinding resolve. I squeezed my eyes shut and made a silent, unbreakable vow to the tiny life growing inside me. I promised my unborn child that we would survive this. I swore that I would never let anyone step on us again. I would claw my way back from absolute nothingness if I had to. Exhaustion finally overpowered my racing thoughts, and I slipped into a restless, feverish sleep right there in the parking lot. I was violently jolted awake by a sharp, jarring ringtone echoing through the freezing car. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. The digital clock on the dashboard read exactly 6 in the morning. The rain had slowed to a steady, depressing drizzle. I scrambled to find my shattered phone in the footwell. The screen flashed with an incoming call from an unknown high-end corporate number. Assuming it was Trent's lawyer calling to threaten me with early eviction proceedings, I swiped to answer, ready to fight. "Hello," I answered, my voice raspy and defensive. "Am I speaking with Mrs. Sydney Thorne?" the caller asked. His voice was deep, authoritative, and carried the unmistakable cadence of expensive legal counsel. "Nobody has called me by that last name in over a decade," I replied, my brow furrowing in confusion. Thorne was the name I had taken at 18 a lifetime ago. My legal name is Sydney Preston now. "Who is calling?" "My name is Mr. Caldwell," he stated calmly. "I am the senior estate attorney representing Gabriel Thorne. I have spent the better part of the night tracking you down, Sydney. I am calling to inform you that Gabriel passed away yesterday afternoon following a sudden heart failure." The air vanished from the freezing car. Gabriel. The name pulled me violently back to a past I had completely buried. I had met Gabriel when I was an 18-year-old girl desperately trying to age out of the foster care system without ending up on the streets. He was a brilliant, reclusive tech developer in his 20s, just starting to build his empire from a cramped garage. We had married hastily in a quiet courthouse ceremony In 2009, bonding over our shared trauma and a mutual desire to escape our grim circumstances. But 2 years later, we realized we were better as friends than spouses. We signed the divorce papers in 2011, hugged each other goodbye, and walked away to live our separate lives. I am so incredibly sorry to hear that. I breathed out, genuine grief tightening my chest. Gabriel was a good man. But Mr. Caldwell, I do not understand why you are calling me. Gabriel and I divorced over 10 years ago. You need to contact his next of kin. That is exactly why I am calling you, Mr. Caldwell replied, his tone shifting into sharp clinical precision. You and Gabriel signed the divorce petition in 2011. However, due to a severe administrative error by the state clerk's office at the time, the final dissolution of marriage was never stamped or entered into the registry. We only discovered this oversight last night during the emergency audit of his estate. I sat perfectly still. The damp cold of the car was completely forgotten. What are you saying, Mr. Caldwell? I am saying the divorce was never legally finalized, he explained slowly, letting the massive weight of the reality settle over the line. Under the law, your subsequent marriage to your current husband is entirely void. Legally speaking, Sydney, you are still Gabriel Thorne's wife. You are his legal widow. My mind reeled. If my marriage to Trent was void, then Trent had no legal right to anything. The house, the threats, the divorce he bragged about filing, all of it was built on a marriage that did not legally exist. He could not take half of my business or force me into a grueling legal battle over assets because we were never truly married. Before I could even process the magnitude of that revelation, Mr. Caldwell delivered the final world-shaking blow. Gabriel never wrote a new will after you separated. Mr. Caldwell continued. As his lawful widow, you are the sole legal heir to his entire estate. This includes his private liquid assets and total ownership of his venture capital firm. You need to come to my office immediately, Sydney. You just inherited $50 million. The phone nearly slipped from my frozen fingers. $50 million. The number echoed in the cramped, damp interior of my beaten sedan like a transmission from another universe. I stared blankly at the fogged windshield, trying to reconcile the freezing reality of my current homelessness with the astronomical figure Mr. Caldwell had just spoken. Gabriel, the quiet, brilliant boy who had once shared cheap ramen with me in a tiny studio apartment, had built an empire and left the keys entirely to me. I need you to come to my office at the Columbia Center immediately, Sydney. Mr. Caldwell instructed, his voice cutting through my shock with practiced authority. We have extensive paperwork to review, and the board of his venture capital firm is already demanding answers regarding the succession plan. I will have my security team clear you through the private parking garage. I looked down at my mud-stained coat and ruined shoes. I am currently sitting in a motel parking lot in wet clothes. I said, my voice shaking as the adrenaline began to wear off. The man I thought was my husband threw me out last night. I do not exactly look like the CEO of a $50 million estate right now. Mr. Caldwell did not miss a single beat. You are the sole owner of Thorne Capital, Sydney. It does not matter if you walk into my office wearing a garbage bag. You own the building. I will see you in 20 minutes. He ended the call. I sat in the suffocating silence of my car for a long moment, my hands resting protectively over my stomach. Trent had thrown me away like trash, confident that I had no resources, no family, and no power to fight back. He had paraded his mistress into my home, certain he had orchestrated the perfect, devastating victory. He had no idea that his cruelty had merely pushed me out the door just in time to catch a golden parachute. I started the engine, the aggressive roar of the old sedan sounding surprisingly triumphant, and drove straight toward downtown Seattle. The Columbia Center loomed against the gray morning sky. Following Caldwell's instructions, I bypassed the main lobby and drove into the secured underground garage where a private elevator awaited me. When the polished steel doors opened on the top floor, I stepped into a breathtaking expanse of floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Puget Sound. Mr. Caldwell was waiting for me. He was a distinguished man in his 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that sized me up instantly. He did not judge my disheveled appearance. Instead, he offered a respectful nod and ushered me into a massive conference room. On the mahogany table sat a stack of thick legal binders. He walked me through the impossible reality step by step. He produced the original 2009 marriage certificate, complete with Gabriel's unmistakable signature, followed by the 2011 divorce petition that lacked the crucial judicial stamp. Because Gabriel had died intestate, meaning without a formal will updating his beneficiaries, the state law automatically diverted his entire estate to his legal spouse. That was me. Your subsequent marriage to Trent is legally classified as void ab initio, Mr. Caldwell explained, tapping a manicured finger against a thick legal textbook. It means invalid from the start. You do not need a divorce from Trent because in the eyes of the law you were never married to him. He has zero claim to this $50 million estate, and furthermore, any marital assets you supposedly shared with him are subject to immediate separation under fraud statutes since he entered the marriage under false pretenses. A cold, sharp wave of satisfaction washed over me. Trent thought he had stripped me of my home and my dignity. He thought he held all the legal cards. In reality, he was legally nothing to me. However, Mr. Caldwell continued, his tone shifting into something significantly more intense. The $50 million in liquid assets and real estate is only one half of the equation. The other half is Thorn Capital, Gabriel's venture capital firm. As the sole heir, you are now the majority shareholder and acting CEO. Last night, when I realized you were the beneficiary, I took the liberty of auditing the firm's primary debt portfolio to prepare you for immediate business operations. Mr. Caldwell slid a sleek black folder across the polished mahogany table. It stopped right in front of me. I opened the cover. The logo on the first page made the breath catch in my throat. It was the corporate crest of Trent's company. The very same company where he served as a senior executive and where Jamal worked as the chief accountant. I looked up, my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. What is this, Mr. Caldwell? That is a detailed financial report on one of Thorn Capital's largest and currently most problematic debtors, he replied smoothly. Your former partner's company took out a massive operational loan from Gabriel's firm 2 years ago to fund their aggressive expansion. They have defaulted on their last 3 payments. Their business is currently bleeding cash at an unsustainable rate. Mr. Caldwell leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. Yesterday afternoon, mere hours before Gabriel passed away, their CEO submitted a desperate plea for a $5 million loan extension. If Thorn Capital denies this extension and calls in the debt, that company will be forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy by next Friday. The executive board, including your former partner, will lose everything. Their assets will be liquidated, and their equity will be rendered entirely worthless. I stared at the financial spreadsheets, the numbers blurring together as the astronomical weight of the situation finally settled over me. Trent had kicked me out into the freezing rain, boasting about his corporate salary, his house, and his untouchable status. He had threatened Jamal's job to force him into submission. He had paraded Bianca around, promising her a life of limitless luxury funded by his executive paycheck. They all believed they held the high ground. They believed they had won. But as I sat in that sky-high conference room, looking at the exact documents that dictated whether Trent's company survived the week or collapsed into absolute ruin, a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Trent was not untouchable. His entire existence, his career, his wealth, and his arrogant pride were currently balancing on the edge of a cliff. And I was the one holding the absolute power of life and death over his entire future. I stared at the pristine pages of the financial report, tracing the crisp black ink that spelled out the impending doom of my soon-to-be ex-husband. The sheer poetry of the situation was almost too perfect to comprehend. Trent had spent years mocking my career, calling my public relations firm a cute little hobby, while he paraded around in custom suits paid for by a company that was secretly drowning in debt. He had built his entire identity on the illusion of corporate supremacy. Now I was looking at the exact mathematical formula that proved he was nothing more than a desperate man dancing on a financial landmine. Mr. Caldwell. I said, my voice steadying as the initial shock gave way to absolute ice-cold clarity. Tell me exactly how this loan is structured. If Thorn Capital denies this $5 million extension, what happens to Trent personally? I do not care about the nameless executives on his board, but I need to know precisely how much damage this inflicts on him. Mr. Caldwell leaned back in his leather chair, a faint glimmer of professional respect shining in his eyes. He opened a secondary file and slid a highlighted contract toward me. Gabriel was a notoriously ruthless investor, Sydney. He rarely handed out unsecured cash. When Trent's company took this initial loan, the executive board was required to put up their personal equity as collateral to secure the funding. Trent leveraged every single share he owns in that company to guarantee his portion of the debt. I read over the highlighted paragraphs, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. So if they default on the payments, Thorn Capital does not just force them into bankruptcy. We get to seize their assets. Exactly, Mr. Caldwell confirmed with a sharp nod. If you deny the extension and call in the debt, the company defaults immediately. The corporate accounts will be frozen by the end of the business day. But more importantly, the collateral clause is triggered. Trent's equity shares will be legally transferred directly to Thorn Capital to satisfy the outstanding balance. He will be stripped of his title, his salary, and his entire net worth in a matter of hours. He will leave that building with nothing but a cardboard box. A cardboard box. The image of Trent walking out of his glass office with his belongings packed into a cheap box, just like the one he had dumped onto our flooded porch last night, sent a rush of pure adrenaline straight through my veins. He had kicked me out to make room for Bianca, banking on his executive salary to fund their new life together. He had threatened Jamal, holding his paycheck hostage to force my brother-in-law into silent compliance. Trent believed money gave him the ultimate authority to destroy people without consequence. Where do I sign? I asked, reaching for the silver pen resting in the center of the mahogany table. Mr. Caldwell pushed a towering stack of legal binders toward me, opening the first one to a page marked with a red tag. By signing these documents, you are officially accepting the inheritance of Gabriel Thorne's estate. You are assuming the role of majority shareholder and acting chief executive officer of Thorn Capital. You will have immediate unrestricted access to the $50 million in liquid funds, as well as total executive authority over the firm's entire lending portfolio. I took the heavy silver pen and pressed the tip to the thick paper. My hand did not shake. I signed my name over and over again, binding myself to the empire Gabriel had built. With every stroke of the pen, the frightened, freezing woman who had slept in a motel parking lot faded further into the past. I was no longer a victim. I was the apex predator in a corporate jungle Trent thought he ruled. Once the final signature was complete, Mr. Caldwell carefully gathered the binders. Congratulations, Madam CEO. The estate is yours. Now, regarding the $5 million loan extension request from your husband's company, would you like me to draft the denial letter and initiate the asset seizure immediately? We can have them in bankruptcy court by Monday morning. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sweeping Seattle skyline, watching the rain clouds slowly begin to break apart over the Puget Sound. If I pulled the plug right now, Trent would be destroyed today. But an immediate execution was far too merciful for what he had done to me. If we denied the loan outright, he might panic and find a predatory lender to bail him out at the last second. He might scramble and find a way to survive. I did not want him to survive. I wanted him to feel secure right up until the very moment the floor collapsed beneath his feet. No, I said softly, turning back to face my lawyer. Do not deny the extension yet. I want to set a trap. Send their board of directors an official notice that Thorn Capital is undergoing a sudden transition of leadership due to unforeseen circumstances. Tell them the new CEO has placed all loan extensions under an indefinite executive review. Mr. Caldwell raised an eyebrow, a knowing smile playing on his lips. You want to string him along. You want him to sweat. I want him to bleed out slowly. I corrected my tone devoid of any hesitation. Let Trent believe the money is still coming. Let him keep making promises to his mistress and his mother. Let him climb as high as he possibly can so the fall destroys him completely. But while we string his company along, I want to start applying the pressure personally. I pointed to the financial report still resting on the table. Trent uses a corporate credit card for his personal expenses. He charges expensive dinners, luxury hotel stays, and lavish gifts to his executive expense account, claiming them as client entertainment. As the primary creditor auditing their failing business does, Thorn Capital have the authority to flag and freeze discretionary corporate spending. Mr. Caldwell tapped his chin thoughtfully. Given their current default status and the executive review clause you just activated, absolutely. We can freeze their corporate credit lines within the hour, under the guise of an operational audit. Do it, I commanded. Freeze every single corporate card issued to their executive board. I want Trent's financial oxygen cut off today. I stood up from the massive leather chair, suddenly hyper-aware of my ruined, mud-stained coat and damp hair. I had the power, the money, and the strategy to completely dismantle the people who had tried to bury me. But if I was going to wage this war, I could no longer look like the broken wife who had been thrown out in the rain. I needed to look like the $50 million nightmare they were about to face. I thanked Mr. Caldwell, took the limitless black card he handed me, and prepared to transform myself. Stepping out of the private elevator and into the crisp Seattle air, I felt the heavy weight of the black titanium card pressing against my palm. It was not just a piece of metal. It was an absolute weapon. I walked away from the Columbia Center and headed straight toward the upscale retail district. The rain had completely stopped, leaving the city streets slick and gleaming under the breaking sunlight. People cast sideways glances at my ruined, mud-caked coat and disheveled appearance, but their judgment no longer held any power over me. I was a $50 million ghost walking among them. I walked through the towering glass doors of a flagship designer boutique. A perfectly groomed sales associate immediately stepped forward, her eyes darting to my filthy shoes with barely concealed disdain. She opened her mouth, likely to direct me to a public restroom or politely ask me to leave. I did not give her the chance to speak. I handed her the titanium card. "I need a complete wardrobe replacement," I said, my voice projecting absolute authority. "Everything from undergarments to outerwear. I want sharp lines, structured blazers, and impeccable tailoring. We are starting from scratch, and I have zero patience for delays." The associate glanced at the card, recognizing the exclusive insignia of unlimited wealth. Her condescension evaporated instantly, replaced by panicked, fawning subservience. She ushered me into a private VIP fitting room, bringing out racks of pristine, high-end garments. I stripped off the damp, freezing clothes from the night before and let them fall into a pathetic pile on the plush carpet. That was the old Sydney. That was the woman who begged a manipulative monster for basic human decency. I stepped into a tailored emerald green suit that fit like second skin. The sharp shoulders and cinched waist commanded respect. I paired it with sleek black stiletto heels that echoed with power every time I took a step. I purchased cashmere coats, silk blouses, and Italian leather handbags, replacing my entire existence with items that radiated undeniable success. I also selected a heavy diamond-encrusted watch, snapping it around my wrist as a physical reminder that my time of being a victim was officially over. When the associate handed me the receipt, the astronomical total did not even make me blink. I told her to throw my old clothes directly into the dumpster out back. Next, I walked into the most exclusive salon in the downtown corridor. I demanded an immediate appointment, and the titanium card easily bypassed their 6-week waiting list. A team of stylists went to work. They washed away the freezing rain, the mud, and the exhaustion of the past 24 hours. They treated my hair, transforming the tangled mess into a sleek, glossy blowout that framed my face with sharp precision. A makeup artist erased the dark circles of my sleepless night, replacing my tired, tear-stained complexion with a flawless, striking look. Red lips, sharp contour, and eyes that held no mercy. When I finally looked in the full-length mirror, the breath caught in my throat. I did not just look wealthy, I looked completely lethal. The soft, accommodating wife who had tirelessly funded Trent's corporate ladder climb was entirely gone. The woman staring back at me was an untouchable executive, a mother fiercely protecting her child, and a billionaire CEO ready to burn her enemies to the ground. I thanked the stylists, leaving a tip that made them gasp aloud, and walked back out into the bustling city. I needed a base of operations, a fortress where Trent could never reach me. I directed my hired private driver to a five-star luxury hotel known for its impenetrable security and absolute discretion. At the front desk, I booked their top-floor penthouse suite indefinitely. I explicitly instructed the concierge that my name was to remain strictly confidential and that no visitors were allowed without my direct verbal authorization. The manager personally escorted me to the private elevator. When the doors opened into the penthouse, I was greeted by sweeping panoramic views of the Seattle skyline and the vast ocean beyond. The suite was a masterpiece of modern architecture featuring a massive marble kitchen, a sunken living area with a modern fireplace, and a master bedroom that felt like an absolute sanctuary. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at the tiny cars navigating the streets below. I placed my hand gently over my stomach, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. "We are safe now," I whispered to my baby. "Nobody is ever going to throw us out into the cold again. I promise you that. We have everything we need, and anyone who tries to hurt us will pay the ultimate price." I sank into the plush velvet sofa, finally allowing my body to rest in the quiet, secure warmth of the suite. I had just purchased a brand new encrypted smartphone to replace the one Trent had shattered on the concrete stairs. I set up my new accounts, ensuring my digital footprint was completely secure and detached from any shared plans I previously held with my ex. I was in the middle of syncing my professional business contacts when the pristine screen suddenly flared to life. A notification chimed loudly in the silent room, shattering the perfect tranquility of my new fortress. It was an encrypted, anonymous text message from an unregistered number. I stared at the screen, my heart rate picking up a sudden cautious rhythm. Only my lawyer had this new number. I opened the secure application. The message contained only 2 sentences. "I know exactly what Trent is planning next. Meet me at the Pike Place coffee shop in 1 hour and come alone." I opened the secure application. The message contained only 2 sentences. "I know exactly what Trent is planning next. Meet me at the Pike Place coffee shop in 1 hour and come alone." I stared at the glowing screen, calculating the risks. It could easily be a trap orchestrated by Trent or Patricia to corner me into signing away my rights to the house. But the old Sydney, the one who would have cowered in fear and second-guessed every move, was completely gone. I locked my phone, grabbed my Italian leather handbag, and headed straight for the private elevator. I stepped out onto the bustling Seattle streets, blending seamlessly into the affluent morning crowd. The Pike Place coffee shop was tucked away, in a discreet, dimly lit corner, away from the main tourist traffic. It was the perfect location for a clandestine meeting. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, the brass bell chiming softly above me, and my eyes scanned the dark booths lining the back wall. Sitting in the furthest, most secluded corner, gripping a paper coffee cup with both hands, was Jamal. He wore a heavy dark jacket, the collar pulled up slightly to obscure his face from anyone who might walk by. He looked absolutely exhausted, carrying the heavy physical burden of a man whose conscience had kept him awake all night. I walked over to his booth, my black stiletto heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor, commanding the space with every step. When I slid into the leather seat across from him, he looked up and his eyes widened in absolute shock. He took in my structured emerald green designer suit, my flawless blowout, and the diamond watch glinting under the dim cafe lights. This was not the soaking wet, shivering victim he had tried to hand a coat to the night before. Sydney Jamal breathed out, his voice thick with disbelief and overwhelming relief. "You look incredible. I was so worried about you. I thought you were sleeping on the freezing streets. I felt sick to my stomach the entire night." I smiled, a tight, highly controlled expression. "I found a much better arrangement, Jamal. You do not need to worry about me anymore. But why am I here? What do you know?" He looked down at his coffee cup, his broad shoulders slumping with profound shame. First, I need to apologize. I am so deeply sorry for last night. I should have fought Courtney. I should have punched Trent in the jaw and driven you to a hotel myself. I watched them pop champagne and toast to that fake heiress while you were out in the storm. It was the most disgusting display of cruelty I have ever witnessed in my entire life. I held up a hand, stopping his apology before he could spiral further into guilt. You do not owe me an apology, Jamal. I know exactly what Trent held over your head. He threatened your job and your livelihood. You have a family to protect, and Courtney would have made your life a living hell. I am not angry with you. I am angry with them. Jamal shook his head firmly, his expression hardening with newfound resolve. No, it is not just about the job anymore. I am done being a pawn in their toxic games. Courtney and Patricia are absolute vultures, and Trent is a monster. I spent the entire night thinking about how easily he threw you away after everything you did for him, after you funded his entire lifestyle. I realized that if he could do that to his own devoted wife, he would not hesitate to throw me under the bus when his company inevitably collapses. I want out of this family, Sydney, and I want to help you take him down. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver USB drive. He placed it carefully on the table and slid it across the smooth wood until it stopped right in front of me. Take it, he urged, his voice dropping to an urgent, cautious whisper. What is this? I asked, picking up the small metal device. It felt incredibly heavy with implication. That is the internal corporate accounting for Trent's company, Jamal explained, leaning forward so no one else could hear. I am the chief accountant. I have unrestricted access to everything. Trent's business is a complete house of cards, Sydney. He has been cooking the books for over a year, hiding massive operational losses by shifting funds between illegal shell accounts. The company is completely bankrupt. He is desperately waiting on a $5 million loan extension from a venture capital firm to cover up the massive fraud. If they audit him closely, he is going to federal prison. A rush of pure vindictive satisfaction surged through me. Jamal had no idea that I was the very CEO of the venture capital firm currently holding that loan. He had just handed me the exact forensic evidence I needed to bypass a lengthy corporate audit and execute Trent immediately. I could freeze his accounts today, hand this drive over to the federal authorities tomorrow, and watch Trent be hauled out of his glass office in handcuffs. This was the ultimate silver bullet. Jamal, this is incredible, I said, carefully slipping the USB drive into my designer handbag. You are risking everything by giving me this evidence. I will make sure you are fully protected when the fallout hits. You have my absolute word. I gathered my things, ready to return to my penthouse and call Mr. Caldwell to initiate the final lethal strike against Trent's company. But as I started to slide out of the booth, Jamal reached out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, desperate, and urgent. His eyes were wide with a disturbing mixture of pity and outrage. Wait, Sydney. Do not leave yet. You need to know the rest. I stopped, settling back into the leather seat. I looked at his terrified expression, suddenly realizing that the corporate fraud was only the tip of the iceberg. What else is there, Jamal? What else did you find in those files? Jamal took a shaky breath, looking me dead in the eyes. The corporate fraud is bad, he said, his voice trembling with the crushing weight of the secret. But that is not the worst part. I broke into his personal files last night looking for offshore accounts. Trent lied to you about the clinic. He lied to you about the argument on the porch. He lied about everything. He stared at my stomach, a look of profound sorrow crossing his face. Trent never had a vasectomy. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I stared at Jamal, processing the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. Trent never had a vasectomy. The accusation on the porch, the shattered pregnancy test, the absolute disgust in his eyes, it was all a meticulously crafted performance. He forged the medical records. Jamal explained, his voice shaking with revulsion. I found an email thread in his deleted folder. He paid off an unethical clerk at a private clinic to generate a fake post-operative report. He knew the baby was his, Sydney. He knew you never cheated. My hands clenched into fists under the table. Why, I demanded, the anger in my chest burning hotter than before. Why go through such an elaborate psychopathic lie just to kick me out? If he wanted a divorce, he could have just asked for one. Because of Bianca, Jamal said, leaning closer. She told Trent she is pregnant too, and she convinced him that she is the sole heir to a massive international mining conglomerate. Trent is drowning in corporate debt, and he sees Bianca as his ultimate golden ticket. But she demanded a ring and a house before she would introduce him to her supposed billionaire father. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with sickening clarity. Trent needed to clear me out of the house immediately. If he simply filed for a standard divorce, it would take months and our assets would be frozen and divided. He needed a dramatic fault-based excuse to throw me onto the street and play the devastated victim. By accusing me of infidelity and claiming the child was not his, he gained the immediate sympathy of his toxic mother and sister, justifying his rapid, brutal eviction. He threw away his loyal wife and his actual unborn child just to chase a non-existent fortune. The sheer greed was almost difficult to comprehend. Jamal checked his watch, his eyes darting toward the cafe entrance. I have to get back to the office before Trent notices I am missing from my desk. If he suspects I am talking to you, he will fire me before I can secure my own family's finances. You have given me exactly what I need, Jamal, I said, my voice eerily calm. I promise you Trent will not have a company left to fire you from. You are safe. Jamal stood up, pulling his dark collar back up around his neck. He took one step away from the booth, but suddenly stopped, turning back to face me with a sharp, determined look in his eye. There is one more thing you need to know, Jamal said. Trent is making his grand move tonight. He booked the main private dining room at the Luminary, that new Michelin star restaurant downtown. He is hosting a massive, lavish family dinner. Patricia Courtney and all of Trent's elite social circle are going to be there. He is using the corporate credit card to fund the entire night. He plans to officially introduce Bianca to everyone and announce their engagement. A cold, brilliant thrill shot straight down my spine. The Luminary was notoriously exclusive, catering only to the ultra-wealthy. Trent was pulling out all the stops to impress a woman he believed would save him from financial ruin, using money he did not actually have. What time is the reservation? I asked. 8 o'clock tonight, Jamal replied. He wants it to be a massive spectacle. Thank you, Jamal, I said, a slow, predatory smile forming on my lips. It will absolutely be a spectacle. Jamal gave me a quick nod and hurried out of the coffee shop, disappearing into the crowded Seattle streets. I sat alone in the booth for a few minutes, my fingers drumming rhythmically against the polished wood table. Trent thought he had successfully buried me. He thought he was untouchable, surrounded by his toxic enablers, celebrating his new life with stolen corporate funds. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about what happens when you underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose and $50 million to spend. I gathered my designer handbag and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. I had a few hours to prepare, and I knew exactly what I was going to wear to my husband's engagement party. I returned to my penthouse and laid out the evening's armor. I bypassed the emerald green suit from earlier and selected a razor-sharp black silk tuxedo jacket with structured shoulders and a plunging neckline paired with tailored trousers that elongated my legs. I secured a heavy vintage diamond choker around my neck and slipped into a pair of red-soled stilettos. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was completely unrecognizable from the soaking wet, discarded wife of yesterday. She was pure, unfiltered power. Promptly at 8 o'clock, my private driver pulled up to the valet stand outside the Luminary. The restaurant was a fortress of modern culinary prestige in downtown Seattle, boasting a months-long waiting list and a reputation for catering exclusively to the ultra-wealthy. I bypassed the crowded lobby and approached the maitre d'. Before he could politely inform me that they were fully booked for the evening, I slid the heavy titanium black card across the host stand. I requested a premium table with a clear, unobstructed view of the main private dining alcove. The host took one look at the prestigious insignia on the card, gave a deferential bow, and personally escorted me into the softly lit, opulent dining room. I settled into a plush velvet booth and ordered a glass of their most expensive vintage champagne. It did not take long to spot my targets. Trent had secured a massive circular table right in the center of the elevated dining alcove. He was holding court loudly, ordering expensive appetizers and boasting to the sommelier about his supposedly refined palate with the unearned confidence of a man spending someone else's money. Beside him sat Bianca, draped in a flashy, overly sequined dress, playing the role of the bored, wealthy heiress to absolute perfection. She laughed artificially at every word Trent said, tossing her hair and flashing a massive, albeit entirely fraudulent diamond ring. Patricia and Courtney flanked them on either side, practically vibrating with obnoxious joy. Patricia was waving her hands around, speaking at a volume entirely inappropriate for a Michelin star establishment, making sure the surrounding tables knew her son was marrying an international mining heiress. Courtney was eagerly nodding along, snapping photos on her phone to document their newfound social climbing. They treated the waitstaff terribly, snapping their fingers and demanding immediate service. They looked like a pack of greedy hyenas feasting on a carcass, entirely oblivious to the fact that the carcass was completely poisoned. I sat quietly, taking the slow sip of my champagne, letting the exquisite taste wash over me. I watched them revel in their stolen corporate funds, absorbing their toxic joy. It only took about 15 minutes for the illusion to crack. Courtney raised her phone to take a selfie with Bianca, and as she panned the camera around the room, her lens swept right past my booth. She lowered the phone slowly, her eyes squinting through the dim, ambient lighting. The smug smile instantly slid off her face. She tapped Patricia frantically on the shoulder and pointed a manicured finger in my direction. Patricia turned her head, her jaw visibly dropped. The shock of seeing me sitting in the most exclusive restaurant in the city, dripping in diamonds and high-end silk, clearly short-circuited her brain. But instead of feeling intimidated or cautious, Patricia and Courtney did exactly what narcissistic bullies always do. They doubled down on their cruelty. They pushed their chairs back and marched out of the dining alcove, their heels clicking aggressively against the polished hardwood floor. They stomped over to my table, deliberately blocking my view of the rest of the restaurant and looming over me like menacing gargoyles. "What in the world do you think you are doing here?" Patricia hissed, keeping her voice low but laced with absolute venom. "How did you even get past the front door?" I placed my champagne flute down on the table, resting my hands gracefully on my lap. "I am having dinner, Patricia. It is a restaurant. That is generally how this works." Courtney slammed her hands flat on the edge of my table, leaning in close so I could smell the cheap wine on her breath. "Are you seriously stalking us now, Sydney? This is a new level of pathetic even for you. Trent threw you out last night. You are homeless. You have no job, no money, and no family. Did you max out your last tragic little credit card just to buy a knockoff suit and follow us here?" I looked at her with pure, unbothered amusement. "You seem highly agitated, Courtney. You might want to lower your voice before security asks you to leave. The luminary has a very strict policy against public tantrums." Patricia scoffed, her face turning an ugly shade of red. "Do not you dare speak to my daughter like that. We know why you are here. You are desperate. You dug through Trent's email or tracked his location just to come here and beg him to take you back. You are trying to sabotage his engagement dinner because you are a jealous, barren failure who could not keep a man." I simply smiled. The old Sydney would have cried. The old Sydney would have absorbed those vile words and let them tear her apart. But the billionaire CEO sitting in this booth felt absolutely nothing but cold analytical pity for the fools standing before her. "I am not here for Trent," I said smoothly, picking up my glass again. "I am simply enjoying a lovely evening, though it is endlessly fascinating to watch you both worship a woman you know absolutely nothing about." Courtney let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "We know Bianca is worth more than you could ever comprehend in 10 lifetimes. You are just a bitter orphan who got kicked back to the gutter where you belong. Get up and leave this restaurant right now, or I swear I will scream and tell the management you are harassing us." Before I could reply to Courtney's childish threat, heavy footsteps approached rapidly from behind them. Trent had noticed his mother and sister missing from the engagement table and had tracked them down. He marched up to my booth, his face twisting into a furious scowl when he recognized me. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit, He had undoubtedly charged to the very corporate account I had frozen just hours earlier. Trent looked at my expensive clothes, my calm demeanor, and the crystal champagne flute resting on the table. His eyes flashed with panicked outrage. He genuinely believed I was a desperate broke woman trying to cause a public scene to ruin his big night and scare away his fake heiress. He reached into his suit jacket, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle ticked in his cheek. He pulled out a crisp, brand-new $500 bill. He leaned over the table, invading my personal space, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and arrogant superiority. He slammed the cash down onto my table with a loud, aggressive smack. He slammed the cash down onto my table with a loud, aggressive smack. The crisp $500 bill sat stark against the pristine white tablecloth, a pathetic green flag of his overwhelming arrogance. Trent leaned over, planting his hands firmly on the edge of the velvet booth. He tried to use his physical size to intimidate me, looming over my dinner space like a schoolyard bully. "Take the money, Sydney," he snarled. He kept his voice to a harsh, jagged whisper, so the surrounding patrons of the Michelin star restaurant would not hear his utter lack of class. "Take the cash and leave this restaurant right now before you scare Bianca. You have made your pathetic little point by stalking us here. Now buy yourself a cheap hotel room for the night and stop embarrassing yourself in front of my family." Patricia and Courtney stood right behind him, their faces glowing with vicious, unearned satisfaction. They looked at the $500 bill as if Trent had just performed an act of supreme benevolent charity. Courtney actually crossed her arms over her chest and let out a soft, mocking sigh. "You should be thanking him on your knees," Courtney chimed in, her voice dripping with thick condescension. "It is a lot more than a jobless foster kid deserves after trying to trap my brother with another man's baby. Go on, Sydney, take the handout and scurry away." I looked down at the money. I did not reach for it. I did not flinch, and my expression did not change. I simply stared at the crumpled green paper as if someone had just placed a dead cockroach on my dining table. The sheer audacity of a man who was currently drowning in millions of dollars of corporate debt, trying to buy my dignity with $500, was almost poetic in its irony. I slowly lifted my gaze, letting my eyes lock directly onto Trent's. He expected tears. He expected me to snatch the money in absolute desperation. Instead, he found nothing but freezing, terrifying indifference. I did not say a single word to him. I simply raised my right hand, lifting 2 fingers into the air and snapping them sharply to summon the floor manager. The response was instantaneous. The general manager of the Luminary, a man who had likely spent decades catering to the most demanding members of Seattle's elite, recognized the subtle, commanding gesture of someone who expected immediate compliance. He practically sprinted across the dining room floor. He completely bypassed Trent, Patricia, and Courtney, as if they were nothing more than inconvenient pieces of furniture blocking his important path. "Yes, madam," the manager said, offering a deep, highly respectful bow the moment he reached the edge of my booth. "How may I assist you this evening?" I reached into my silk Italian clutch and slowly pulled out the heavy matte black titanium card. The metallic surface caught the dim ambient lighting of the restaurant, flashing the exclusive invitation-only crest of Thorn Capital. I placed it deliberately on the white tablecloth right next to Trent's pathetic $500 bill. The manager's eyes locked onto the black card immediately. The color drained from his face for a fraction of a second, before transforming into an expression of absolute, unwavering reverence. This was a card issued only to the absolute highest echelon of global wealth, a corporate instrument with literally no spending limit. "I am finding the atmosphere in this particular corner of the room to be incredibly cheap and visually offensive," I said. My voice was smooth, loud, and perfectly articulated so that every single word sliced right through Trent's fragile ego. "I need something to cleanse my palate and my eyes. Do you currently have the 1990 Chateau Petrus in your private cellar?" The manager swallowed hard, his posture straightening even further as he processed the magnitude of the request. "We do, madam. We have exactly 3 bottles remaining in our private reserve. They are currently priced at $5,000 each." "Excellent," I replied without a single second of hesitation. "I will take 2 of them." Trent let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. Courtney's jaw literally dropped open, her eyes bugging out of her head. $10,000 on wine. They stared at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. Their brains were completely short-circuiting, entirely incapable of processing the math unfolding in front of them. But I am not drinking them, I continued smoothly. I waved my hand dismissively toward a neighboring booth where a young, bewildered couple was celebrating what looked like a quiet anniversary. Please open both bottles and deliver them to those lovely strangers over there with my compliments. Tell them it is a gift to celebrate genuine love, something that seems to be severely lacking in this establishment tonight. And while you are at it, please dispose of this trash that someone left on my table. I casually flicked Trent's $500 bill with my manicured fingernail, pushing it right off the edge of the table. The bill fluttered pitifully through the air and landed directly in a puddle of melted ice near Trent's polished leather shoes. Certainly, madam. Right away, madam, the manager said, his voice trembling with sheer awe. He picked up the black card with both hands, treating it like a sacred artifact, and bowed again before rushing off to execute my absurdly lavish command. I leaned back against the plush velvet booth, crossing my legs gracefully, and picked up my crystal champagne flute. I took a slow, deliberate sip, my eyes never leaving Trent's face. The silence that engulfed my ex-husband and his toxic family was absolutely deafening. Patricia looked like she was going to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved, her eyes darting frantically between me, the empty spot where the black card had been, and the young couple at the next table who were about to receive a $10,000 gift from a complete stranger. Courtney gripped the edge of my table, her knuckles turning bone white. The smug superiority had been violently slapped out of her. Trent stood completely paralyzed. The arrogant smirk had been ripped from his face, replaced by a look of profound, primal confusion. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked down at his own $500 bill lying soaking wet on the floor, then back up at my vintage diamond choker, the custom silk tuxedo jacket, and the absolute power radiating from my posture. He was a man who worshipped money, who measured every ounce of human worth by a price tag. And I had just effortlessly incinerated $10,000 right in front of his face, simply to insult him. "You," Trent stammered, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic squeak. Where did you get?" He could not even finish the sentence. His reality was collapsing in real time. He had spent the last 24 hours convincing himself that I was a broken, penniless victim wandering the freezing streets. Seeing me wield the kind of astronomical wealth that he could only ever dream of possessing completely broke his psychological framing. "I suggest you return to your fake heiress, Trent," I said softly, my tone laced with lethal amusement. "You are hovering around my table like a common beggar, and it is ruining my appetite." Patricia grabbed Trent's arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging desperately into his suit jacket. She was terrified. She did not know who I had become or who was funding me, but the sheer financial violence of my actions told her that I was no longer prey. "Trent, we need to go back to the table," Patricia hissed, her voice trembling with rising panic. "Bianca is watching us." Trent physically recoiled, taking a staggering step backward as if I had burned him. His eyes were wide with a deeply rooted fear. His ego, fragile and entirely dependent on his financial superiority, had just been pulverized into dust. He could not comprehend my wealth, but his desperate need to save face in front of his new mistress overrode his shock. He grabbed his mother and sister by their arms, hauling them away from my booth. He threw his shoulders back, puffing out his chest in a pathetic, transparent attempt to regain his shattered dignity, and stormed back toward the private dining alcove to pay his own enormous bill and prove he was still a king. I watched from the quiet sanctuary of my velvet booth as Trent marched back to his elevated dining alcove. He practically shoved his mother and sister into their respective chairs before dropping heavily into his own seat next to Bianca. From my vantage point, the entire scene played out like a silent film of a sinking ship. He immediately flagged down a passing server, waving his hand with that exaggerated, impatient authority he always used when trying to impress a room. He wanted the check. He needed to prove to his fake heiress, to his toxic family, and most of all to himself that he was still the wealthy executive in control. The waiter approached holding a sleek black leather folio containing the bill for their extravagant engagement dinner. Given the massive seafood towers, the imported steaks, and the endless bottles of wine I had watched them consume over the past 2 hours, the total was undoubtedly in the thousands. Trent did not even glance at the itemized receipt. He wanted to make a show of his supposed infinite wealth. He reached into his tailored suit jacket with a theatrical flourish and withdrew his heavy metallic corporate credit card. I recognized that specific card instantly. It was the executive expense account directly tied to his company, the exact same corporate credit line I had ordered Mr. Caldwell to freeze just 1 hour ago. Trent tossed the metal card onto the silver tray with a loud clatter. He leaned back in his chair, draping one arm casually around Bianca's shoulders, projecting the image of a man who did not care what anything cost. Bianca smiled and kissed his cheek, her eyes sparkling at the display of financial dominance. Patricia and Courtney had finally stopped looking over their shoulders at my table, choosing instead to bask in the glow of Trent's corporate power. I picked up my champagne flute and waited. Less than 3 minutes later, the floor manager returned. This was the same manager who had just processed my $10,000 wine order. He did not approach Trent's table with the usual discreet, quiet deference reserved for wealthy patrons. Instead, he walked with stiff, rigid professionalism. He carried the silver tray holding Trent's corporate card and a small printed receipt. "I am sorry, sir," the manager said. His voice carried perfectly across the quiet ambient hum of the dining room. "Your card has been declined." The artificial smile slid right off Trent's face. Bianca stopped mid-laugh, her manicured hand freezing on the stem of her wine glass. Patricia and Courtney exchanged a sharp, confused look. "Declined." Trent scoffed. His voice was laced with aggressive disbelief. "That is a platinum corporate account. There is no limit on that card. You clearly made a mistake with your machine. Run it again. I already ran it a second time to be absolutely certain, sir," the manager replied smoothly, not backing down an inch. "The terminal is functioning perfectly. The transaction was rejected by your issuing bank. The error code explicitly states the account has been frozen." Trent's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of crimson. The surrounding tables had gone completely silent. Diners who had previously been enjoying their meals were now openly staring at the spectacle unfolding in the center of the room. Nothing draws the attention of the elite quite like the sudden public failure of wealth. "Run my personal card." Then Trent snapped, snatching the corporate card off the tray and slapping a different piece of plastic down. He was sweating now. I could see the distinct sheen of moisture gathering on his forehead. I knew exactly what would happen next. Trent had drained our joint checking account the night before to secure a down payment for whatever apartment he planned to rent with Bianca. His personal credit cards were already maxed out from funding his secret double life. He had nothing left. He had been relying entirely on his company expense account to fund this lavish lifestyle until his next bonus arrived. A bonus that was never coming. The manager took the personal card and walked back to the terminal. He returned less than a minute later, shaking his head. "I apologize, sir, but this card has also been declined for insufficient funds. Do you have another method of payment for the $4,200 balance?" The words "insufficient funds" echoed through the dining alcove like a gunshot. Bianca physically recoiled from Trent sliding her chair back to put distance between herself and the humiliation. The illusion of her powerful, wealthy fiancé was vaporizing before her eyes. Trent was hyperventilating. He patted his pockets frantically, pulling out his wallet to search for a hidden lifeline that did not exist. The manager stood waiting, his posture completely unforgiving. "Mom," Trent hissed, leaning across the table toward Patricia. His voice was high and panicked, completely devoid of the arrogant swagger he possessed just 10 minutes ago. "Mom, I need you to cover this. My bank must have flagged my accounts for fraud alerts because of the large purchases today. Just pay the bill and I will wire you the cash tomorrow morning." Patricia looked absolutely horrified. She was a woman who prized social status above all else, and her son was currently begging her for money in front of a Michelin star waitstaff and a room full of wealthy strangers. Furthermore, Patricia did not have $4,000 in disposable cash just sitting in her checking account. She lived comfortably, but her wealth was tied up in assets and strict monthly budgets set by her late husband's trust. "I do not have that kind of limit on my daily card, Trent," Patricia whispered furiously, her face turning an alarming shade of purple. "Use another one of your accounts." "I do not have another one," Trent shot back, his panic escalating into genuine terror. "Just give them whatever you have, Courtney. Give them your card too. We have to split it. Hurry up." Courtney let out a dramatic gasp of outrage, but she begrudgingly dug into her designer purse. For the next agonizing 5 minutes, I watched my ex-husband, his toxic mother, and his vicious sister frantically empty their wallets. They handed the manager a pathetic stack of 4 different credit cards, begging him to split the enormous bill across multiple accounts just to cover the cost of their engagement dinner. Bianca looked absolutely mortified. The fake heiress who demanded rings and mansions was currently watching her supposed corporate king scrape together his mother's grocery money just to pay for an appetizer platter. She crossed her arms, glaring at Trent with pure disgust. I raised my crystal flute toward their table, offering a silent, mocking toast. Trent happened to glance up at that exact moment. Our eyes locked. He saw the cold, calculated triumph in my gaze. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing ringtone erupted from Trent's suit jacket. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking violently as he looked at the screen. It was an automated alert from his company's financial sector. I watched his eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated horror as he read the notification. This was not a bank glitch. This was not a routine fraud alert. The message undoubtedly informed him that the primary creditor holding his entire company afloat had just frozen all executive assets pending a comprehensive audit. The corporate money was gone. The company was in freefall. Trent shoved the phone back into his pocket, his breathing turning ragged and desperate. He did not say a single word to Bianca. He did not apologize to his mother or thank her for bailing him out. He simply pushed his chair back with such force that it crashed to the floor, abandoned his family at the table, and sprinted blindly toward the restaurant exit, desperately scrolling through his contacts to call his boss. The total destruction of his life had officially begun. Trent burst through the heavy glass doors of the luminary, stumbling onto the damp Seattle pavement. The cool night air hit his flushed face, but it did nothing to lower his skyrocketing body temperature. He frantically scrolled through his contacts, his thumb slipping against the glass screen due to the cold sweat coating his palms. He bypassed his mother and sister, entirely abandoning them to deal with the fallout of the humiliated fake heiress inside. He had one singular, desperate focus. He needed to know why the financial lifeline of his entire corporate existence had just been violently severed. He pressed the call button for the president of his company, pacing aggressively down the sidewalk. The phone rang 6 times before it went to voicemail. He cursed loudly, kicking a nearby metal pole, completely ignoring the startled glances of passing pedestrians. He dialed again, then a 3rd time. Finally, a breathless, panicked voice answered on the other end. The company president did not offer a greeting. He simply yelled that Thorn Capital had initiated an emergency freeze on all operational funds, claiming their loan extension was under a hostile executive review. The company was bleeding out in real time, and every single corporate credit line had been shut down with 0 warning. Trent spent the rest of the night pacing the hardwood floors of his empty, dark house, the same house he had violently kicked me out of just 24 hours prior. He did not sleep a single wink. His phone buzzed relentlessly, but it was never the news he wanted. Bianca sent exactly 1 text message stating she was staying at a boutique hotel downtown and that he should not bother contacting her until he fixed his embarrassing financial situation. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for was already pulling away at the very first sign of poverty. By the time the sun rose over the Puget Sound, Trent looked like a hollow, decaying shell of the arrogant executive he claimed to be. He threw on yesterday's wrinkled suit, masking the smell of stale fear with expensive cologne, and rushed into his corporate office. The atmosphere inside the building was sheer, unfiltered chaos. Junior employees were whispering in the break rooms. Board members were shouting behind closed glass doors. Jamal was barricaded in the accounting department, refusing to answer Trent's frantic demands for updated spreadsheets. The entire company was collectively staring down the barrel of immediate bankruptcy. Trent locked himself inside his corner office, staring at the flashing red alerts on his dual monitors. His personal bank accounts were completely drained. His corporate safety net was gone. His only hope of survival lay in the hands of the faceless executives at Thorn Capital. For the next 8 hours, Trent waged a relentless, desperate telephone campaign. He dialed the primary contact number for Thorn Capital over and over again, only to be met with automated hold music and polite, unyielding receptionists who transferred him to endless voicemail boxes. His initial tone of aggressive corporate authority slowly deteriorated into a pathetic, high-pitched beg. He needed to speak to the loan officer. He needed to speak to the portfolio manager. He needed anyone to explain why a guaranteed $5 million extension had morphed into an immediate asset freeze. At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the automated hold music abruptly stopped. A sharp, highly professional female voice came over the line. "Thorn Capital Executive Office. How may I direct your call?" Trent gripped the edge of his mahogany desk, his knuckles turning stark white. He leaned into the speakerphone, his voice trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and raw terror. "This is Trent from the executive board of your primary tech portfolio. I have been trying to reach someone in your lending department all day. Our operational accounts have been frozen without due process. We submitted our request for the $5 million loan extension directly to Gabriel Thorne yesterday. I demand to speak with him immediately to clear up this catastrophic clerical error." There was a brief, chilling pause on the other end of the line. The quiet tapping of a keyboard echoed softly. "I apologize for the confusion, sir," the secretary replied, her tone perfectly devoid of any human empathy. "Gabriel Thorne passed away yesterday afternoon." Trent stopped breathing. The blood completely drained from his face. The man holding his company's entire debt portfolio was dead. For a fleeting fraction of a second, a sick, twisted wave of relief washed over Trent. If the billionaire was dead, the debt collection might be delayed in probate court. They might have months to restructure their finances while lawyers argued over the estate. However, the secretary continued smoothly slicing right through Trent's momentary delusion. The transition of leadership has already been fully executed. A new chief executive officer has taken absolute control of the firm and the entire $50 million estate. It was by the direct personal order of the new CEO that your specific corporate account was flagged for immediate asset seizure due to breach of contract. Your loan extension has been officially denied. Trent leaped out of his leather chair. The panic clawing at his throat finally boiled over into outright rage. "What do you mean denied?" he screamed, slamming his fist against the desk. "You cannot just bankrupt a company overnight because you got a new boss. We have a standing relationship with that firm. Who the hell is this new CEO? I demand to know who has the authority to shut down my entire life. Put them on the phone right now." The secretary did not raise her voice. She did not flinch at his hostility. She simply delivered the final lethal blow with surgical precision. "The CEO does not take direct calls from defaulting debtors, sir," she stated coldly. "But since you are requesting official verification of leadership, I am forwarding the verified corporate press release to your professional email address right now. It outlines the succession plan and introduces the sole heir to the Thorne estate. Have a pleasant evening." The line went dead. Trent stood paralyzed in the center of his office, his chest heaving as he stared at his computer monitor. A single unread email popped into his inbox. The subject line read, "Official Leadership Transition at Thorn Capital." His hand shook violently as he reached for the mouse. He clicked the email open. A high-resolution, professionally captured photograph filled the entire screen. It was a picture of me. I was wearing the razor-sharp black silk tuxedo jacket and the vintage diamond choker, looking directly into the camera with an expression of absolute terrifying power. The bold black text beneath the photograph officially introduced Sydney Thorne as the sole legal widow, the sole inheritor of the $50 million fortune, and the newly instated CEO of the very firm holding Trent's financial executioner's axe. Trent stared at my face, his mind completely shattered. The woman he had thrown into the freezing rain, The woman he had discarded to steal a fake fortune was actually the billionaire holding the match to his gasoline-soaked life. His fingers went completely numb. The expensive smartphone slipped from his grasp, crashing heavily onto the hardwood floor. He fell back into his chair, gasping for air that suddenly felt entirely toxic. He was completely, irrevocably destroyed. Trent remained frozen on the floor of his office for nearly an hour. The sheer magnitude of his miscalculation had crushed the air completely out of his lungs. But as the initial paralyzing shock finally wore off, the primal instinct of a desperate, greedy man took over. He scrambled across the hardwood floor, snatching up his dropped phone with trembling, sweaty hands. He could not accept total financial ruin. His toxic ego quickly convinced him that Sydney, the accommodating woman who had faithfully supported his career for 5 years, was still hiding somewhere beneath that terrifying new billionaire facade. He told himself that her wealth was an opportunity, not a death sentence. He just needed to find her. He just needed to spin the perfect manipulative story to bring her back under his control. He spent the next several hours frantically pulling strings, bribing valets, interrogating downtown concierges, and exploiting every remaining social connection he possessed in the city. By late evening, his desperate campaign paid off. A highly compensated concierge at the most exclusive luxury hotel in the financial district confirmed that a woman matching my exact description and operating under a limitless corporate account had secured their top-floor penthouse suite indefinitely. Trent did not hesitate for a single second. He drove his leased sports car recklessly across the city, abandoning it right at the curb as he sprinted into the grand marble lobby. I was standing by the massive stone fireplace in my penthouse, looking out over the glittering Seattle skyline when the secure intercom chimed. The front desk manager sounded incredibly tense as he informed me that a frantic man, claiming to be my husband, was demanding immediate access to my suite. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I could have instructed security to throw him out onto the pavement. I could have let him suffer in the lobby, but denying him access would have been far too easy. I wanted him to walk into my fortress. I wanted him to see the astronomical wealth he had thrown away. "Send him up," I commanded softly. Less than 2 minutes later, the private elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Trent practically fell into the opulent foyer. He looked absolutely pathetic. His expensive suit was deeply wrinkled, his tie was discarded, and dark, exhausted circles framed his bloodshot eyes. He took one look at the staggering luxury of the sweeping penthouse suite, the imported modern art, the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, and the quiet, undeniable power radiating from where I stood in my tailored silk loungewear. The gravity of his mistake hit him so hard his knees physically buckled. Trent dropped straight to the polished hardwood floor. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, completely abandoning whatever shreds of corporate dignity he still possessed. "Sydney, my God, I have been out of my mind with worry," Trent cried out. Real tears streamed down his flushed cheeks, though I knew with absolute certainty that he was weeping for his bank account, not his marriage. "Please, you have to listen to me. I made a catastrophic mistake. I was not in my right mind yesterday." I did not move an inch. I simply looked down at him, my expression a mask of pure, unbothered ice. "Explain it to me, Trent. Explain how throwing my belongings into the freezing mud was a simple mistake." He scrambled closer, stopping just short of touching the hem of my silk robe. "It was Bianca," he sobbed, his voice cracking with desperate, manufactured agony. "That woman is a complete psychopath, Sydney. She bewitched me. She targeted me at a networking event because she knew I was stressed about the company audits. She preyed on my vulnerability and fed me absolute lies. She manipulated my mind until I did not even know who I was anymore. I kicked her out today. I swear to you, I threw her right out of my office the second I realized what she had done to us." The sheer audacity of his gaslighting was almost impressive. He was throwing the woman he had proudly paraded into my house straight under a speeding bus just to save his own skin. He reached up, clasping his hands together as if praying to a deity, and the baby Trent continued his words, spilling out in a frantic, manic rush. "Sydney, I was so confused and angry because of the pressure Bianca put on me. But I called my old urologist this morning in a total panic. I made them pull my medical files from 3 years ago. The doctor told me the procedure must have reversed itself. He said it happens in rare cases. My vasectomy failed, Sydney. The baby is a medical miracle, and it is definitely mine. I know it is mine. I stared at him, marveling at the depths of his depravity. Jamal had already provided me with the undeniable proof that Trent had paid off a corrupt clinic clerk to forge fake post-operative reports. Trent never had the surgery to begin with. Yet here he was, kneeling on my floor, weaponizing our unborn child and spinning a wildly intricate lie about a medical miracle just to secure a $50 million payday. I know I hurt you, Trent, wept, finally reaching out to gently touch the toe of my slipper. But I am begging you to forgive me. I love you. I have always loved you. We are a family, Sydney. We are a family, and we need to stay together for our baby. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, hopeful plea. He genuinely believed his performance was working. He thought the mention of our family would trigger the old accommodating wife who used to fix all of his problems. I looked down at the man sobbing on my floor. I did not scream. I did not throw my glass at the wall. Instead, I let a soft, cold smile touch the corners of my mouth. I appreciate your honesty, Trent. I said, my voice smooth and perfectly measured. Tearing apart a marriage is a massive decision, especially with a child involved. I think it is incredibly important that we handle this transition with the proper respect our family deserves. Trent let out a massive, shuddering breath of relief. A greedy, triumphant spark ignited in his tear-filled eyes. He thought he had successfully manipulated the situation. He thought my calm demeanor meant submission. However, I continued, stepping back slightly to break his physical contact with my shoe. We cannot resolve something this complex in a hotel room. We need to do this properly. I want you to bring Patricia and Courtney to Mr. Caldwell's legal office this Friday at exactly noon. We are going to sit down as a family, discuss our assets, and finalize the future of our estate together. Trent scrambled to his feet, his face glowing with sheer, unadulterated victory. Yes, absolutely. Friday at noon. My mother and sister will be thrilled, Sydney. They have been sick with worry about you, too. We will all be there. Thank you. Thank you for giving us another chance. He backed toward the elevator, nodding profusely, completely blind to the executioner's axe swinging directly toward his neck. He stepped into the elevator, believing he had just secured a $25 million victory. He had absolutely no idea he had just accepted an invitation to his own slaughter. The very next morning, the sleek digital console in my penthouse suite chimed with an alert from the front desk. The concierge informed me that a massive delivery required my immediate authorization. I approved it, fully expecting a courier to arrive with the finalized legal documents from Mr. Caldwell regarding the venture capital firm. Instead, the private elevator doors slid open to reveal 3 hotel staff members, struggling under the weight of the most ostentatious, obnoxious floral arrangements I had ever seen in my life. Towering displays of white orchids, imported lilies, and cascading rare roses completely filled my entryway. The overwhelming, cloying scent of the flowers instantly suffocated the crisp air of the suite. It reeked of absolute desperation. Attached to the largest, most expensive-looking bouquet was a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with gold wax. The elegant cursive handwriting unmistakably belonged to Patricia. I opened it, my eyes scanning the sickly sweet, utterly fabricated apology written inside. "Sydney, my dearest daughter," she wrote. "Trent told us all about the terrible, heartbreaking misunderstanding at the restaurant last night. I am utterly devastated that my fiercely protective maternal instincts came across as hostility toward you. We were all just so overwhelmed by the crushing stress of Trent's corporate audits, and we lashed out unfairly. Please forgive an old woman who loves you dearly. You have always been the heart of this family. I cannot wait to hug you on Friday so we can put this ugly chapter behind us." I stared at the heavy cardstock, feeling a profound wave of physical nausea. This was a woman who less than 48 hours ago had looked me dead in the eyes on a flooded porch and called me a stray dog with no pedigree. Now faced with the blinding, undeniable glare of a $50 million fortune, she was suddenly playing the role of the doting, affectionate mother-in-law. I tossed the card onto the marble kitchen island and instructed the hotel staff to throw every single flower arrangement directly into the trash compactor in the basement. I refused to let the stench of her hypocrisy linger in my sanctuary for even a second. A moment later, my secure phone vibrated against the countertop. I picked it up and saw a notification from a social media platform I rarely checked. It was from Courtney, the sister-in-law who had literally threatened to scream for security if I did not leave the Michelin star restaurant, was now publicly declaring her undying devotion to me. She had posted a highly filtered, heavily edited throwback photograph from a holiday party 3 years ago. In the picture, we were standing next to a decorated fireplace. I remembered that night perfectly because just moments before the camera flashed, Courtney had loudly mocked my outfit. Now the caption beneath the photo made my blood run cold. "Reunited, and it feels so good," Courtney wrote, adding a string of heart emojis. I am so incredibly blessed to have a sister-in-law who embodies grace, forgiveness, and unconditional love. Family is forever, Sydney. You are the best sister a girl could ever ask for. The comments were already flooding in, filled with mutual acquaintances praising our beautiful bond. Courtney was meticulously crafting a public narrative, laying down a digital paper trail to prove we had a deeply connected, loving relationship. She was desperately trying to erase the reality of her extreme cruelty, replacing it with a fake history of sisterly affection. It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation, designed entirely to paint them as the perfect supportive family, just in case their sudden reconciliation was ever challenged in a courtroom. But I did not have to guess what was truly happening behind their closed doors. Jamal, my steadfast ally trapped inside their toxic inner circle, was keeping me fully informed. Later that afternoon, my encrypted phone lit up with an incoming call. Jamal spoke in a hushed, urgent whisper, clearly calling from a remote stairwell to avoid detection. "Sydney, you need to be prepared for Friday," Jamal warned, his deep voice tight with anxiety and disgust. "I was at the house last night after Trent came back from your hotel. They are not genuinely sorry. They do not care about you, and they certainly do not care about the baby. They spent the entire night drinking expensive scotch and celebrating." Celebrating, what I asked, leaning against the glass wall of my penthouse watching the city below. Celebrating their impending payday, Jamal explained, his tone dripping with sheer contempt. "Patricia and Courtney convinced Trent that your newfound wealth is their ultimate golden ticket. They did some frantic online legal research after Trent got home. They believe that because you inherited this massive $50 million estate while you were legally married to Trent, it automatically qualifies as a shared marital asset under state property laws." Trent was literally jumping up and down in the living room, claiming he is legally entitled to exactly $25 million. A dark, humorless chuckle escaped my lips. The sheer arrogance of their greed was astounding. They truly believed they could abuse me, discard me, and then waltz into a lawyer's office to collect half of an empire they had absolutely nothing to do with. "It gets worse, Sydney." Jamal continued, his tone turning grim. "Patricia liquidated one of her emergency retirement accounts this morning. She took that cash and hired a notoriously aggressive divorce and asset division attorney. This guy is a literal shark who specializes in ruthless corporate uncoupling. They are paying him an astronomical retainer to march into your lawyer's office on Friday. Trent's entire plan is to sit there looking like the devoted, forgiving husband, while his attack dog lawyer legally strong-arms you into surrendering $25 million. Jamal took a shaky breath before delivering the final warning. "If you refuse to hand over the money, they plan to threaten you with a highly publicized, drawn-out legal battle that will freeze your assets for years. They think you will just hand over the cash to make them go away. They think they have you completely trapped." I looked down at the bustling streets of Seattle, feeling the heavy, cold power of the truth resting safely in my mind. They were marching into Friday's meeting absolutely convinced they were going to walk out as multimillionaires. They had no idea they were walking straight into a legal slaughterhouse. "Thank you, Jamal. I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper. Let them bring their shark. He is going to need a lot more than a law degree to save them from what is coming on Friday. Friday arrived with a crisp, brilliant blue sky that felt like a stark contrast to the impending slaughter. I sat at the head of the massive mahogany table inside Mr. Caldwell's ultra-modern conference room at the Columbia Center. I wore a tailored charcoal suit that projected pure, unyielding authority. My posture was perfectly straight. My expression was an impenetrable mask of absolute calm. Mr. Caldwell sat to my right, his pristine leather briefcase resting closed on the table. We did not need to review our strategy. The legal trap was already set, fully loaded, and simply waiting for the prey to step onto the trigger. At exactly noon, the heavy glass doors swung open. Trent strutted into the room first, radiating a sickening aura of unearned confidence. He had clearly spent hours grooming himself for this exact moment, wearing his most expensive navy suit and a carefully practiced expression of deep marital concern. Right behind him marched Patricia and Courtney, both clutching designer handbags and wearing identical predatory smirks that they desperately tried to disguise as supportive smiles. Patricia wore a lavish string of pearls, clearly dressing for the new tax bracket she felt she was about to enter. Trailing the family was a sharp-featured man in his 50s, carrying a bulging briefcase. This was undeniably the aggressive attack dog lawyer Patricia had liquidated her retirement account to hire. We will call him Mr. Pierce. Trent immediately walked over to my side of the table. He ignored the empty leather chair positioned across from me and instead pulled a seat right up next to mine. He reached out, attempting to cover my hand with his own, entirely ignoring the fact that just a few days ago he had thrown my belongings into the freezing mud and paraded his pregnant mistress into my home. Sydney, sweetheart. Trent murmured, his voice dripping with artificial warmth. You look absolutely beautiful today. My mother, my sister, and I have been so incredibly worried about you. We are just so glad we can finally sit down as a family and get everything sorted out. We want to support you through this massive transition. I smoothly withdrew my hand, sliding it off the table and resting it gracefully on my lap. The physical rejection caused a brief, ugly flash of anger to spark in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with a martyred sigh. He took his seat, leaning back and crossing his legs like a king preparing to collect his taxes. He truly believed his performance was flawless. He thought I was still the vulnerable, compliant wife who would desperately cling to his fake affection to avoid a confrontation. Mr. Pierce did not bother with pleasantries. He stepped up to the table and violently slammed a thick, heavily tabbed manila folder down onto the polished mahogany surface. The loud smack echoed through the quiet conference room, a deliberate intimidation tactic meant to rattle me. Let us bypass the formalities and get straight to the point, Mr. Pierce stated, his voice booming with arrogant authority. My client, your husband, has been remarkably patient and forgiving regarding your recent erratic behavior. However, we are fully aware of the $50 million estate you recently inherited. Under the state property laws governing this jurisdiction, any assets acquired during the timeline of a legal marriage are classified as shared marital property. Patricia shifted in her seat, lifting her chin proudly. Courtney actively smirked, pulling out her phone as if she were preparing to shop for yachts the second this meeting concluded. They were barely containing their sheer, unadulterated greed. Mr. Pierce tapped his index finger aggressively against the folder. We have prepared a comprehensive settlement agreement. Trent is willing to be incredibly generous. He is asking for exactly 50% of the total estate. $25 million transferred into his personal accounts within 14 business days. In exchange, he will agree to an amicable, uncontested divorce, and he will graciously allow you to keep your little public relations business. I stared at the lawyer, my expression entirely blank. And if I refused this generous offer, I asked, my tone utterly devoid of any emotion. Mr. Pierce leaned across the table, showing his teeth in a predatory grin. If you refuse, we will immediately file for a highly publicized contested divorce. We will petition the court to freeze all $50 million of your inherited assets until a judge can rule on the division. That is a brutal process that will take years. Furthermore, my client is fully prepared to take his story to the media. We will paint you as an unstable, manipulative gold digger who abandoned her devoted husband the second she came into money. Your professional reputation will be completely annihilated. Sign the papers today, Sydney, or we will drag you through a legal hell you cannot possibly afford to fight." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Trent sat up taller, a look of supreme, undeniable victory plastered across his handsome face. He genuinely believed he had cornered me. He thought the threat of a messy public scandal and frozen assets would force me to sign away half of Gabriel's empire just to make him go away. Patricia let out a soft, triumphant sigh, practically tasting the millions she thought were about to flood her bank account. Courtney crossed her arms, looking at me with pure, unadulterated contempt, waiting for me to break down and surrender. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of defense against their ridiculous, fabricated threats. I slowly reached for the crystal glass resting in front of me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the ice-cold water, letting the crisp liquid cool my throat, while they all watched me with eager, greedy anticipation. I set the glass down with a soft, definitive clink. I turned my head, locked eyes with Mr. Caldwell, and gave him a single, barely perceptible nod. It was time to drop the bomb. Mr. Caldwell calmly unclasped the brass latches of his pristine leather briefcase. The sharp metallic clicks echoed like a judge's gavel in the tense silence of the conference room. He did not rush. He withdrew a single slender file folder, his movements precise and entirely devoid of the aggressive theatrics Mr. Pierce had employed. He placed the file squarely in the center of the table, resting his hands lightly on top of it. "Mr. Pierce," Caldwell began, his voice maintaining the measured, unbothered tone of a man who held every single winning card. "Your settlement proposal is certainly ambitious. It relies heavily on the statutes governing shared marital property in this jurisdiction. However, there is a fundamental flaw in your legal strategy. In order for assets to be classified as marital property and therefore subject to division, there must first be a legally recognized marriage." Trent frowned, a flicker of confusion breaking through his arrogant facade. "What are you talking about, Sydney? And I have been married for 5 years. We have a marriage certificate." Mr. Pierce puffed out his chest, stepping forward to defend his client's claim. "If you are attempting to stall by questioning the validity of the marriage license, I assure you it is fully registered with the county. We are not playing semantic games today, Caldwell." "We are certainly not playing games," Caldwell replied smoothly, sliding the file across the table until it stopped directly in front of Trent's aggressive attorney. "I suggest you review the documents inside that folder, Mr. Pierce, specifically the certified records obtained directly from the state clerk's office regarding my client's previous marriage in 2009. Patricia scoffed loudly, waving a dismissive hand. "Sydney was a teenager. That ridiculous little marriage was dissolved ages ago. Trent told us all about it." "It was petitioned for dissolution," Caldwell corrected, his eyes locking onto Mr. Pierce, whose face was rapidly losing color as he scanned the first page. "But due to a critical administrative error, the final decree was never officially stamped or entered into the legal registry. The divorce was never legally finalized." Trent stared at his lawyer. The smug certainty began to melt off his face, replaced by a creeping cold dread. "Pierce, what is he talking about? What does that mean?" Mr. Pierce did not answer immediately. He flipped to the second page, his hands beginning to tremble slightly. The aggressive attack dog was suddenly realizing he had walked his client straight into a legal minefield. "It means," Caldwell stated, delivering the lethal blow with surgical precision, "that when Sydney entered into a marriage contract with you 5 years ago, she was still legally married to Gabriel Thorne. Under the laws of this state, your marriage to my client is classified as unintentional bigamy. The legal term is void ab initio." Caldwell leaned forward, his voice dropping to a hard, unforgiving tone. "It means invalid from the very start. You are not her legal husband, Trent. You have never been her legal husband. Therefore, there are no marital assets to divide. There is no divorce to contest. You are legally a stranger to my client, and you are entitled to absolutely nothing." The absolute silence that followed Mr. Caldwell's declaration was so profound, I could hear the faint ticking of my diamond watch. Trent stared at the senior attorney, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He turned his desperate, frantic gaze toward Mr. Pierce, waiting for his highly paid attack dog to rip this argument to shreds. But Mr. Pierce was not attacking. The aggressive lawyer was entirely silent, his eyes frantically scanning the certified documents bearing the official raised seal of the state. He flipped the pages reading the statutes, verifying the dates, and confirming the total absence of the final judicial signature on my 2011 divorce decree. "Do something," Trent hissed, slamming his hand on the mahogany table. "Pierce, you told me we had a bulletproof case. Tell him he is lying." Mr. Pierce slowly closed the manila folder. He did not look at Trent. He looked directly at Mr. Caldwell with the grim professional resignation of a man who knew he had just been completely outmaneuvered. "He is not lying," Mr. Pierce said, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance. "The state law is absolutely unambiguous on this matter. Void ab initio means the marriage never legally existed. You have no community property rights. You have no legal standing to claim a single penny of her inheritance." Patricia let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp. All the color instantly drained from her face, leaving her looking like a withered gray ghost. She clutched her pearl necklace, her chest heaving as the reality of her shattered payday set in. Courtney grabbed the edge of the table, her manicured nails scraping against the polished wood. She began taking short, rapid breaths, hyperventilating as the millions she had already spent in her mind vanished into thin air. Mr. Pierce stood up. He did not ask for permission. He simply reached for his briefcase, snapped the brass clasps open, and shoved his useless settlement documents inside. "Where do you think you are going?" Trent demanded, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "You work for me. You are going to fix this." "I work for clients who actually have a legal case," Mr. Pierce replied coldly, snapping his briefcase shut. "And more importantly, I work for clients who can afford to pay my billable hours. Since you are not legally entitled to $25 million and your personal bank accounts are currently empty, my services are officially terminated. Have a good afternoon." The lawyer turned on his heel and marched straight out of the conference room, abandoning his clients without a single backward glance. The heavy glass door swung shut, sealing Trent, Patricia, and Courtney inside their own personal nightmare. Trent fell back into his chair, his hands trembling violently. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a pathetic, desperate pleading. "Sydney, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "You cannot do this. We built a life together. I bought that house with you. We were starting a family. You cannot just erase 5 years of our lives on a legal technicality." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "I am not erasing anything, Trent. I am simply holding you to your own standard. You looked me in the eye on a freezing flooded porch, handed me a garbage bag of ruined clothes, and told me I was nothing. You threw a stranger out into the storm so you could move your fake heiress into my home. You just forgot to make sure that stranger did not have the power to destroy you." Patricia tried to speak, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "Sydney, we can find a compromise. We are reasonable people." I ignored her completely, keeping my eyes locked on Trent. "We are finished discussing my personal life." I stated, my tone shifting from cold rejection to sharp corporate authority. "Now let us move on to official business." I gave Mr. Caldwell another nod. He opened his briefcase a second time and withdrew a sleek black folder bearing the silver crest of Thorn Capital. He slid it across the table until it rested directly in front of Trent. As the majority shareholder and acting chief executive officer of Thorn Capital, I said, every word dripping with lethal precision. "I have completed the executive review of your company's financial status. I have reviewed the fraudulent accounting, the hidden operational losses, and the desperate request for a $5 million loan extension." Trent's eyes darted down to the folder. He recognized his own corporate financials. The last shred of color left his face. "As your primary creditor, I am officially denying your request for the loan extension," I declared. "Furthermore, due to the severe breach of contract and the fraudulent financial reporting submitted to my firm, I am calling in your existing debt. The entire balance is due immediately by the close of business today." "You cannot do that!" Trent screamed, leaping out of his chair. "If you call in the debt today, the company defaults. My shares are the collateral. You will wipe out my entire equity. I will lose my job. I will lose everything I have worked for. Yes, I replied calmly. Your shares are forfeit. They will be legally transferred to Thorn Capital within the hour. You are no longer an executive. You have no salary, no corporate credit card, and absolutely no equity. You are bankrupt. Trent stood completely paralyzed, his mind finally grasping the inescapable totality of his ruin. He had no marriage to leverage for cash. He had no house, as his name on the deed meant nothing without the funds to pay the mortgage. He had no job to run back to. He was entirely assetless, standing in the very clothes he had bought with money he no longer possessed. He was utterly, completely ruined. Patricia began to weep openly, burying her face in her hands. Courtney was clutching her chest, gasping for air as a full-blown panic attack took hold. They had walked into this high-rise office expecting to conquer an empire. Instead, they had been stripped down to absolute nothingness. Trent stumbled backward, defeated, broken, and completely devoid of his former arrogant swagger. He turned toward the heavy glass doors, desperate to escape the room, to run away and hide from the catastrophic wreckage of his own making. But as his hand reached for the door handle, I spoke one last time, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating air of the conference room. Do not leave just yet, Trent. I commanded softly, a razor-sharp smile curving my lips. We are not finished here. Wait, there is one more guest. The heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open. Every eye in the room turned toward the entrance. Jamal stepped across the threshold. He wore a sharp, impeccably tailored suit, standing tall and projecting an aura of absolute, unshakable confidence. He no longer looked like the trapped, humiliated accountant who had lowered his head in shame on my flooded porch. He looked like a man who had finally broken his chains and reclaimed his entire identity. Courtney gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in sheer outrage. Jamal, what in the world are you doing here? She demanded, her voice shrill with arrogant confusion. You are supposed to be at the office fixing this financial mess. Trent glared at his brother-in-law, a flash of his old toxic authority, attempting to resurface despite his recent financial execution. Jamal, get back to work immediately. I did not authorize you to leave the building, let alone come to my private legal meeting. Jamal did not flinch. He did not lower his gaze. He simply walked past his frantic wife and his ruined boss, stepping directly up to the mahogany table. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavily tabbed manila folder. He dropped it onto the polished wood surface, right next to the corporate financial documents Mr. Caldwell had just presented. The heavy thud echoed like a final nail being driven into a coffin. I do not take orders from you anymore, Trent. Jamal stated, his deep voice ringing with absolute authority. My resignation was submitted to Human Resources an hour ago. But before I cleared out my desk, I decided to do a little independent auditing, not just on the fraudulent corporate accounts you tried to force me to hide, but on the new woman you so proudly moved into Sydney's home. Patricia let out a shaky breath, clutching her chest, as a new wave of panic washed over her. What are you talking about? She whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the folder. Bianca is an international mining heiress. She comes from a very prominent, wealthy family. Jamal let out a short, humorless laugh. He flipped open the cover of the dossier, revealing a massive stack of background checks, credit reports, and court records. There is no international mining conglomerate, Jamal said, his words slicing through the room with lethal precision. Her real name is Bianca Rossi. She does not have a trust fund. She does not have a billionaire father. What she does have is over $150,000 in maxed-out credit card debt, 2 repossessed vehicles, and 3 outstanding civil judgments against her for severe financial fraud spanning across 4 different states. Trent stumbled forward, gripping the edge of the table as if the floor had suddenly dropped out from underneath him. No, he stammered, his eyes frantically scanning the highlighted legal documents. No, that is completely impossible. She showed me her portfolio. She showed me the investment accounts. She showed you forged documents she bought off the internet. Trent, Jamal corrected mercilessly. She is a serial scam artist who targets arrogant men in expensive suits. She spotted you throwing around a limitless corporate credit card at that networking event and realized you were the perfect gullible mark. She needed a wealthy idiot to pay off her massive debts and fund her luxury lifestyle. You handed her the keys to Sydney's house on a silver platter. Courtney let out a sharp, hysterical sob. She gripped her perfectly styled hair, shaking her head violently. This cannot be happening. We told everyone at the country club about her family. We introduced her to the board. We bragged about her pedigree. It gets substantially worse, Jamal continued, refusing to offer them a single ounce of mercy. Trent, you threw your fiercely loyal wife out into the freezing rain because you claimed Bianca was carrying your child. You bragged to everyone about securing your legacy. Trent swallowed hard, a sickly pale sheen covering his face. He looked at Jamal with raw, undisguised terror. She is pregnant, Trent whispered desperately, his voice cracking. I saw the ultrasound. I went to the clinic with her. That baby is mine. Jamal pulled a final document from the back of the folder. It was a printed collection of text messages, emails, and eviction notices retrieved by a private investigator. Bianca is currently facing a massive eviction lawsuit at her downtown apartment complex, Jamal explained, tossing the papers directly in front of Trent. She has not paid rent in over 8 months. To avoid being thrown out onto the street, she has been sleeping with her 52-year-old landlord since last summer. The room went dead silent. The horrific realization began to dawn on Trent, his eyes widening to the size of saucers as he stared at the text message transcripts. That baby does not belong to you, Trent, Jamal stated, delivering the absolute fatal strike. The timeline matches perfectly with her landlord. She got pregnant by a middle-aged man she was using for free rent. When she realized he had no actual money to support a child, she panicked. She went out hunting for a wealthy savior to pin the pregnancy on, and you walked right into her trap. You are not her knight in shining armor, you are just her newest wallet. And now that your corporate card is declined, she is already packing her bags. Trent physically collapsed. His knees gave out entirely, and he crashed down into the leather chair, staring blankly at the wall. His mind was violently tearing itself apart as the astronomical weight of his catastrophic failure finally crushed him. Patricia buried her face in her hands, weeping loudly, mourning the total destruction of her social standing and the imaginary wealth she had banked her entire future on. Courtney stood frozen, staring at her husband in sheer terror, realizing that Jamal held all the cards and was no longer playing their toxic family games. I watched Trent's chest heave as he struggled to draw breath. He looked down at his shaking, empty hands. The devastating comparison hit him like a freight train. He had held a genuine $50 million empire in the palm of his hands. He had been married to a woman who loved him unconditionally, who funded his career, and who was carrying his actual biological child. Instead of cherishing that beautiful life, his blinding greed and toxic arrogance had driven him to burn it all to the ground. He threw away a fiercely loyal billionaire wife and his own flesh and blood, all so he could completely ruin his career, face federal fraud charges, and lose his home for a bankrupt scam artist who was carrying a stranger's baby. He had traded a flawless diamond for a handful of toxic dirt, and he was finally choking on it. The silence in the conference room shattered as the sheer reality of their destruction finally set in. Patricia was the first to snap. The woman who had prized her elite social standing above all else suddenly lunged across the mahogany table. Her hand struck Trent's cheek with a sharp, echoing slap that whipped his head to the side. "You absolute fool!" Patricia shrieked, her voice completely devoid of its usual aristocratic polish. "You threw away $50 million for a destitute scam artist. You bankrupt your company, you humiliated our family in front of the entire city, and you dragged me into this mess. We are going to lose everything because you could not keep your ego in check." Trent just sat there, clutching his stinging cheek, staring blankly at the floor as his mother continued to scream at him. He was completely hollowed out, a broken shell of the arrogant man who had strutted into the room an hour ago. Courtney, meanwhile, turned her frantic, venomous rage toward the only target she felt she could still control. She marched right up to Jamal, her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly entitlement. "How dare you do this to us?" Courtney screamed, jabbing her finger into her husband's chest. "You are supposed to protect this family. You are supposed to fix his accounting, not hand the evidence over to her. You are going to march back to that office right now, shred those documents, and figure out a way to save my brother's company. If you do not fix this today, Jamal, I swear I will make your life a living nightmare. Jamal did not flinch. He looked down at the woman he had spent a decade trying to please, and his expression held nothing but cold, absolute exhaustion. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick white envelope. He pressed it firmly into Courtney's chest, forcing her to take it. I am not fixing anything for your brother ever again, Jamal stated, his deep voice echoing with profound liberation. Those are the signed divorce papers, Courtney. My lawyer filed them with the county court this morning. I am officially resigning from my position at the company effective immediately. You can keep the house, the cars, and the country club memberships. They are all about to be seized by federal creditors anyway. Have a nice life. Courtney looked down at the legal envelope in her trembling hands. The vicious anger drained from her face, replaced instantly by sheer suffocating panic. She looked up at Jamal, her mouth opening to argue, but he simply turned his back on her and walked calmly over to my side of the table, aligning himself with the winning team. I stood up slowly, smoothing the sharp lines of my black silk tuxedo jacket. The sudden movement drew every eye in the room. Trent finally looked up from the floor. His eyes were red-rimmed wide and filled with a pathetic, desperate pleading. He opened his mouth, likely to beg for a fraction of mercy, but I raised my hand, silencing him instantly. Do not say a single word, Trent, I commanded, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal register that froze the air in the room. I want you to remember the freezing rain on Tuesday night. I want you to remember the exact sound my luggage made when you threw it into the mud. You looked me in the eyes and told me I was a stray dog. You told me I had no family, no pedigree, and absolutely nothing to my name. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the polished table, making sure he felt the full, crushing weight of my presence. You thought you were burying me. You thought you could strip me of my dignity and leave me to freeze while you celebrated your brilliant little scam. But throwing my bags out into that storm was the absolute greatest favor you ever did for me. You did not break me, Trent. You simply handed me the key to my own cage, and while you were busy playing a wealthy executive for a broke, desperate fraud, I stepped into an empire. I picked up the black titanium card resting on the table and slipped it carefully into my designer handbag. You are bankrupt, I finalized, staring down at the miserable, broken man who used to be my husband. You are facing federal fraud charges, and you are entirely alone. You built your own grave, Trent. Now you get to lie in it. I turned on my heel, my red stiletto heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Mr. Caldwell and Jamal fell into step right behind me like a highly paid, utterly loyal vanguard. I walked straight through the heavy glass doors of the conference room, leaving Trent, Patricia, and Courtney screaming at each other amidst the total catastrophic wreckage of their own greed. 6 months later, the Seattle rain had given way to a brilliant sun-drenched afternoon. I sat on a plush outdoor sofa in the sprawling manicured gardens of my $50 million estate. The gentle breeze rolled off the Puget Sound, carrying the scent of blooming hydrangeas. I looked down at the beautiful, perfectly healthy baby boy resting safely in my arms. He had Gabriel's dark hair and my stubborn chin, a physical testament to survival and new beginnings. The heavy glass patio doors slid open and Jamal walked out onto the terrace. He was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored navy suit, looking completely rejuvenated. As the newly appointed chief financial officer of Thorn Capital, he had spent the last 6 months aggressively restructuring the firm's lending portfolio. He handed me a crisp financial report, a warm, genuine smile lighting up his face. Everything is secured, Sydney Jamal reported proudly. The final corporate liquidation for Trent's old firm went through this morning. I took the report, bouncing my son gently on my knee. And Trent, I asked, my tone entirely conversational. Jamal let out a short, satisfied laugh. He pleaded guilty to the corporate fraud charges to avoid a maximum sentence. He is currently working a grueling minimum wage construction job, digging ditches on the highway just to pay off the court-ordered restitution. Patricia and Courtney are living in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, fighting constantly about money. I looked out at the glittering ocean, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of peace wash over my entire soul. They were completely irrelevant now, nothing more than a distant, ugly memory fading into the background of my incredibly bright future. I pressed a soft kiss to my son's forehead. There are betrayals that feel like the end of the world, moments that convince you everything you built has been completely destroyed. But sometimes the universe strips away the toxic weight holding you down, just to force you to step into your true power. I learned that you never have to destroy the people who try to break you. You just have to step aside and let their own greed consume them. Because in the end, the absolute sweetest revenge is not anger or retaliation. It is a life beautifully, fearlessly lived, soaring so incredibly high that they do not even have the right to look at you anymore. The most profound lesson from Sydney's journey is that the ultimate revenge is simply a life beautifully lived. When facing devastating betrayal from those we trust, our first instinct is often retaliation. However, this story shows that true power lies in walking away and building your own empire. Toxic individuals will inevitably destroy themselves through their own boundless greed and lies. You rarely need to lift a finger to ruin them. By focusing entirely on your own healing, establishing firm boundaries, and pursuing success, you reclaim your power and render your abusers irrelevant. Have you ever chosen to walk away and heal instead of seeking revenge? Share your story in the comments below.